let's begin from here. Last time, we learned with Yoma, which was 2 weeks ago, we were looking at the end of this Braita. So let's just remind ourselves, the Gemara here is interested in understanding what the Torah means by saying Te'anu et nafshotechem, and this idea of inui nefesh. Just a second. Right. So I listed him, I think, in that shir 2 weeks ago. These are all the places where nefesh is discussed in the Torah vis-a-vis Yom Kippur. And the Gemara later on, in a few more daf, is going to go through to make limudim about all of the inuyim that are listed in the Mishnah. But mainly what we saw so far in the Gemara is this idea that the Braita is promoting, that Ta'anu et nafshotechem comes to include all manner of eating. So just to remind ourselves, so we had a Braita way back here, Tanu Rabbanan Ta'anu et nafshotechem yachol yashem b'chamal b'tzina kadesh yitztaer. So the Braita here starts off from the idea that maybe inui nefesh is something that you have to do actively. Maybe it means that you have to sit in the sun or sit in the cold in order to be uncomfortable. And then we make a limud, Talmud Omar b'chol melacha lo ta'asu, ma melacha sheva al ta'aseh, af inui nefesh sheva al ta'aseh. Just like malacha is something that you sit and you don't do. So also, inui nefesh, affliction of your soul, is something you sit and don't do. In other words, it's a passive thing. One of the reasons I wanted to mention this drasha again is because of the difficulty we had, which we're going to repeat. We'll go through it again. But what we see from already is that the Braita wants us to understand that there's a close connection between doing melacha on Yom Kippur and inui nefesh on Yom Kippur. So that it's the way the Gemara understands the pasuk. This pasuk in Vayikra Tet Zayin, which is in Acharei Mot, והייתה לכם לחוקת עולם בחודש השביעי ועשור לחודש תנו שותיכם לכל מלאכה לא תעשו. האזרח והגר בתוככם. So inui nefesh and melacha are put right next to each other, and the Braita here is learning out something about inui nefesh from melacha. And as we mentioned, even though it's not necessarily their first instinct in terms of what the Torah means to say that inui nefesh is passive, because ta'anu et is a transitive, right? It's a transitive form. So it sounds like you should be actively afflicting your soul. But because of the juxtaposition to kol melacha lo ta'asu, there's an understanding that it's something that's passive. But we'll say something more about that in a moment. Skipped that part. Then we came to this long Braita, where it starts off from the same pasuk Ta'anu et nafshotechem, talk the same way. Yachol yeshev b'chama b'tzina b'yitzta'er tzamud lomar v'chol melacha lo ta'asu. Ma melacha davar shechayivin rav b'makom acher afinui nefesh shechayivin rav b'makom acher. So here also the Braita wants to make a hekesh, right, to learn out something about inui nefesh from melacha. And here the limud is different. It's saying just like melacha is something which you chayav in another place, right, and under other circumstances. So inui nefesh is something that must be something that you're also chayav in another place. What is that? So that would be pigul v'notar. So how did we understand that? What is the Braita here trying to say? How do we understand that the Torah is telling me what's the din that comes out of it? If I stop right here, what is the Braita telling me about inui nefesh?
There's a chiyuv karet.
Well, that's not that's true.
That's connection with pigul and
Pigul, eating pigul and notar is a chiyuv karet. So you're chayav just like. So it's like when you do malacha in other circumstances, you're chayav karet. So also when you eat pigul and notar in other circumstances, in other words, on a day other than Yom Kippur, you're chayav karet. So what does that tell me now about pigul and notar vis-a-vis Yom Kippur?
You're not allowed to eat it on Yom Kippur. It's a form of inui.
Right. So restraining yourself from eating pigul v'notar, that's the inui. The inui is that you hold yourself back from eating pigul v'notar. And why? So why do I include pigul v'notar? Because of what Michael Werner said. Because I'm chayav b'makom acher. I'm chayav like I'm chayav melacha b'makom acher. I'm chayav karet melacha b'makom acher. Let's say on Shabbat. So also restraining yourself or holding back from eating b'makom acher. I'm also chayav. I'm holding myself back from eating something for which I would be chayav karet. So if I stopped right here, then it would tell me what about eating pigul and notar and Yom Kippur? That you would be chayav for eating pigul and notar and Yom Kippur. But it wouldn't necessarily tell me that I'm chayav for eating anything else on Yom Kippur. Right? In other words, the only thing that I'm learning is pigul v'notar. So that leads us into the rest of the Braita, where it says, Avi pigul v'notar shehein rein v'lo avi et hatevel she'no b'karet. So based on this, I would include eating, or let's say not eating pigul v'notar and Yom Kippur because they're chiyuv karet, but I wouldn't necessarily think that eating something that's a lesser chiyuv, like tevel, maybe that's not a sur important. Meaning, it's not a. In other words, even with let's just go through it. So the Braita says that because it also says ta'anu et nafshotechem in another pasuk, and v'initem et nafshotechem, it comes to be marbeh. It comes to add on or to include others of eating, even eating tevel. And then I continue on as we said. We go down a list, beginning with a chiyuv karet, then eating tevel, which is a chiyuv mitah. And then we go to eating a nevela, which is not a chiyuv mitah, but it's a sur. And then I go into eating chulin, which is mutar, but there's no chiyuv to eat chulin. and then I include also eating truma, where there is a chiyut, and then I include eating kadashim, where there's not only a chiyut, but there's a chiyuv to eat with a restriction in time. It has to be a certain amount of time. So that's a quick summary of all of that part of the Braita. But then the Braita says, Vim nafshach lomar, if you want to say, in other words, I'll give you an alternative source for not eating on Yom Kippur, and the alternative source is Harei Omer v'Havadati et hanefesh hahi inui shehu avedat nefesh ve'ezeh zeh achila u'shtiya. So this is what we discussed last time, and I showed you the Torah Tamima, who says that we should different girsa here altogether. The pasuk of V'Havadati et nefesh is specifically about melacha, right? The pasuk is from Parshat Amor. B'chol nefesh asher taseh kol melacha be'etzem hayom hazeh V'Havadati et nefesh hahi mikerav hama. So if you do malacha on Yom Kippur, then you're chayav avedot nefesh, and that's understood to be another way of saying. So, the question is, how can the Gemara learn out about inui nefesh from this pasuk? Because this pasuk is talking about malacha. So the Torah Yoma says the pasuk that is brought here, ta'anu et nafshotechem. In other words, the same pasuk, or v'initem et nafshotechem. Actually, now I don't remember which one he attached it to. Hold on a second. All right. Oh no, here we go. Yeah, he attaches it to Tanu and Nafshotechem in Achrei Mot. So I'm not going to go through the Torah Tamim again, but that's his conclusion, is that that's the pasuk that should be brought here, which will make sense, right? In other words, then I can understand, because it's starting off from the same place at the beginning of the first part of the Braita starts off. It starts off here from Tanu et Nafshotechem, and so it makes sense to say Im Nafshach Lamar, if you want to interpret that pasuk differently. Tanu et Nafshotechem Inui Shoavedat Nefesh. But then the question is, according to him, how exactly do I get the drasha of Inui Shoavedat Nefesh from Tanu et Nafshotechem? Where's the Avedat Nefesh that's involved here? Right? So the way he brings it down, it goes like this. So he makes up a Braita. He essentially puts together a Braita based on a couple of sources. And that's why when you see the way he does Tanu and Nafshotechem, he has Tanya, it's in square brackets. He puts a bracket around it, as if to say, this is not exactly the way it appears in either the Gemara or Yerushalmi, but he bases this more Yerushalmi. So the way he wants it to read is Tanya Afal Pi Shamru Yom Kippurim Asur b'chamisha Dvarim. Even though Yom Kippur is Asur with 5 things, En Chayim Karet El Al Achila U'Shtiya. You only chayav karet for eating and drinking. Dichtiv Tanu Nafshotechem Uchtiv. Kikol hanefesh asher lo tuneh v'nichrata. Davar shehu inui beveit nefesh. something which is an inui in the place of your life source. So in Vaveidat Nefesh, it has Vaveit Nefesh, and there's actually a couple of variations on that Girsa. And he says, when he's defending this, his opinion, that there is actually a Girsa in the Bavli that says Tanu et Nafshotem. The reason I'm bringing this up is the whole thing is very odd, and it still doesn't quite sit well with me. And I think I started this last time when we were talking about it. And I'll tell you the reason it doesn't sit well with me is because what comes next in the Gemara. In a moment, there's going to be a problem that we'll get from the next part of the Gemara, which we haven't done yet. But I did want to point out, and I think I maybe mentioned something like this before. The reason I emphasized it earlier in the shir is that the Gemara makes a hekesh between Inui Nefesh and Melacha. Is once the Gemara already understands that there is this close connection between Inui Nefesh and Melacha, right? From the very first time Inui Nefesh is mentioned, toward the end of the Parsha Nachrei Mot, Tanu et Nefshatechem b'chol Melacha lo tasu. But see, when I come to Parshat Emor, even though they're not in the same pasuk, but you can still make a hekesh because it's one after the other. They're in the same context, right? It says, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, ach b'sorah chodesh hashvi'i zeh yom kippurim hu mikra kodesh yelachem, v'nitem v'nafshotechem v'kraftem mishel Hashem." So there, it gives us, based on the terminology that we learned before, this would be the Azhara. This is telling you that you're supposed to do Inui Nefesh on Yom Kippur, but it doesn't give us the punishment. Right after it, it says, "V'chol melacha lo tasu be'etzem hayom hazeh ki Yom Kippurim hu lechaper lechem v'yiften elokechem." Here also it gives us the azhara for not doing melacha in the very next pasuk. First Inui Nefesh, then melacha. Then it gives us the punishment for both of them. Ki kol hanefesh asher lo tineh b'etzem hazeh v'nichletan amei hamea. So I might have said as follows, that the reason that the Breita can bring a proof about the meaning of Inui Nefesh, even though the pasuk is taught from the Havadati at the Nefesh, even though that pasuk is specifically talking about Melacha, but there is already this hekesh. There is already the connection between Inui Nefesh and Melacha. And it's as if to say, we need to learn both of these things together. So when it says, just like it says, here, it says, that really is just another way of saying karet, and that really goes back on both of these things, which are very closely tied. I see them essentially almost as a single unit. I didn't see anybody who made this particular argument, but it seems to me it's a possible way of reading the Gemara without changing the Girsa. And now let's go on a little bit further in the Gemara, and you'll see one of the reasons that I think it may be important to at least put this up as a possibility, because the Gemara right after this says, right, so the Gemara here with these words, that finishes the Brisa. Now the Gemara asks this question about this second part of the Brisa. The Gemara says, "Ma'ivim nafshach lamar." So what does it mean if you want to say? That is, why do I need why would I need another drasha? You just gave me this whole long drasha with ta'anu et nafshotechem v'initem et nafshotechem. It's marbeh all kinds of achila. So why do I need why would I need another drasha? Like, what was wrong with the first drasha? Right. This is a common question. You know, it's also something you learn, like when you learn Rashi, where Rashi gives you more than pshat, right? So you always want to ask, so why did Rashi give you a second pshat? What was with the first pshat? So it's not only in Rashi, it's also in the Gemara, and you see it here from the Gemara. The Gemara asks this question itself on the bright side. What do I need this alternative for? So Gemara answers, if you would say that the pasuk is actually talking about arayot, it's talking about sexual relations. Harehu omer v'avadati hanefesh, inui sheyesh bo avedat nefesh. So thus it says, this pasuk of Havadati HaNefesh, it's an affliction that involves the destruction of the life force. The Ezezeh, and what would that be? That would be Achila and Shtiya. So let's first understand these few lines in the Gemara. So if you would say that the pasuk is talking about arayot. So, if what pasuk is talking about arayot? What's it referring to here?
Tanu et nafshotechem.
Right. So, tanu et nafshotechem, maybe you'll say what it's talking about is arayot. And if that's the case, then what would tanu et nafshotechem mean?
Refrain from sexual activity.
Refrain from sexual activity. So, thus it tells me Havadati HaNefesh, Inui sheyesh bo avedat nefesh. So that's why it has to tell me that it's talking about an inui that involves avedat nefesh, and that would be eating and drinking, right? So if you don't eat or drink, you will surely die at some point. So that's what the pasuk is talking about. That's what Tanu and Nafshotechem is talking about. Why would I think that inui nefesh it refers to arayot? Why would I think that?
Is it also punishable by karet?
Well, yeah, but what's the connection? We have 39 things that the Torah is mechayev karet. What's the connection to inui?
Well, I mean, the Ariot are dealt with in Achrei Mot in the same. In the same. I think in verses that are very close to Tanu et Nafshotechem.
Okay, that's an interesting point, but we need something tighter. So here.
Oh well.
No. In other words, the point is the whole point of what we've been doing here in the Gemara is to try to understand what is inui nefesh. What does that mean specifically? So until now, what we've put out is that apparently it means refraining from eating and drinking. But the Gemara here says you could have also offered up this explanation that it's refraining from sexual activity. So on the basis of what would I associate inui in particular with sexual activity? So let's look at Rashi first. So Rashi says, Klomar, Ritem ba'arayot kamishtaikra, Klomar inui de tashmish kamishtaikra. That is, that the Torah here is talking about the affliction of sexual activity, the tashmish nami akre inui, because tashmish, right, sexual activity is also called inui. V'chayavin of karet b'makom acher, as you pointed out, and it's something for which you are also chayav karet in other circumstances, kegon arayot, like in the case of arayot, where the Torah lists forbidden sexual unions for which one is chayav karet. So this Gemara is, like I said, it's a few daf later, Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, and we will look at it eventually, and we're actually going to glance a little bit tonight. But first I want to go through, if we get there, first I want to just see, based on what the minimum information that we have, we'll see a little bit more.
Shale,
Yes.
on Yom Kippur, you read about Arayot. Where does this come from?
What, in other words, why do we read about Arayot on Yom Kippur? I don't have. I'm not going to go into it. There, as I recall, there are.
Is this maybe this is another interpretation of Inui Nefesh, as you say now? Maybe,
Well,
I don't know.
No.
Well, in the context of Yom Kippur liturgy, as I call, it's brought in the context of Nistarot. It's the Ariot is sort of the
Okay.
quintessential Nistarot. That's in the liturgy, and I
Uh,
don't know if it's. I don't know if it's. I mean, I'm sure there's some other textual basis for it.
As I recall, there are a couple of different explanations for why we read Parshat Arayot on Yom Kippur, but I'm not going to go into it now. I didn't prepare that, and it's not immediately our question. It's a good question, but it's not immediately our question. So let's put that question to the side. So just want to point one thing here, and then I do want to go on and go into this question of Arayot a little bit more carefully. Here, this Gemara here, right? The Gemara here is trying to understand why I brought this second explanation in the Braita, which is based on, according to the Girsa we have, Avadati et Nefesh Shahid. And here, what's the point of using the pasuk of Avadati et Nefesh Shahid? Because I specifically need an inui sheyesh bo avedat nefesh, as opposed to some other kind of inui, which may not have avedat nefesh. That is, arayot is also something that's an inui nefesh, but it doesn't involve avedat nefesh. So I understand from the Gemara's explanation of why I need the second part of the Braita, it seems particularly important that I use that specific pasuk of Havadati HaNefesh. It has to be from Havadati HaNefesh. I have to have something that's Avedat Nefesh, as opposed to an inui that's not Avedat Nefesh. And so that's why I say the Gisa that we have, Avadati et Nefesh Shahi, it does see the correct Girsa, despite the difficulty that it's associated with Malacha. It seems to me that it's very, very difficult to understand the Gemara's explanation of it, where the Gemara absolutely relies on that pasuk. And that, anyway, that's maybe a little bit technical, but that's what I think. Let's go on a little bit further in the Gemara. Let's understand this question of Arayot a little bit more. So after this, the Gemara brings a Braita, the Rabbi Yishmael Tana. They learned in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael, Nemar kan inui, v'nemar lahalan inui, malan inui ra'avon, afkan inui ra'avon. So it's a short Braita, right? So it says, here it says inui, and it says elsewhere inui. So just like elsewhere, the inui is inui ra'avon. The affliction is the affliction of starvation. Afkan inui ra'avon. So when I see inui here in our context, then I'll say it's also an affliction of starvation. In other words, so this is a gzera shava, and it's so what's a gzera shava? I'm sure you've all encountered before.
I mean, one looks at similar languages, one looks at similar language in similar identical language in two different places, and then one makes a connection, if I recall.
Basically, yes. And that's a new interesting phrase, similar, identical.
Similar or, I said similar or identical.
Oh, okay, that was probably a bleep in the connection. So actually, and that's actually accurate. In other words, what you're saying is actually very accurate, because either it's exactly the same or it is similar. Sometimes it's not even the same word, but the context gives us similar understanding. So actually, Gzera Shava, on the one hand, is a basic literary tool, right? In other words, if you're reading a text, and you come across a word that you don't understand, and you continue reading the text, and you see the word in another context, and in the second context, it's clear what the word means, then it stands to reason that's what it meant in the context where you didn't know what it means, right? And that's the way we read books. There's nothing particularly exceptional about this kind of literary analysis. Nonetheless, Gzera Shava, according to the Gemara, is something that it was something that nobody was actually allowed to be done of their own volition. All Gzera Shavas, if that's the right Gzerot Shavot, had to come from a transmitted tradition. They all had to come from a specific tradition. Excuse me. And sometimes there's machlakot about them, but it was not something that somebody just decided on their own. Nonetheless, here the Debei Rabbi Yishmael had this tradition. So what's the Inui Kan? So that's the Tanu and Nafshotechem that we're talking about. The Inui Kan is the Inui of Yom Kippur. And what's the Inui of Ra'avon? So Rashi fills that in. Nemar halan Inui vaya'ancha vayarivecha. So what's that pasuk? Vaya'ancha vayarivecha. So that's the pasuk in Dvarim, where Moshe is speaking to the people, and he's telling them about, right at the end of his life, he's talking about the man. Vaya'ancha vayarivecha vayachilcha et haman asher lo yadata v'lo yad'un avotecha. And he afflicted you, and he made you starve, and then he fed you the man that you did not know, and that your forefathers did not know. The man hodiacha ki lo alechem levado yichya adam ki kol motzat fi Hashem yichya adam. Because man, to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by that which comes forth from the mouth of God. So here in that pasuk, there's a one-to-one correspondence between Inui and Ra'avon, right? Inui that the manifestation of the Inui was starving. So it would stand to reason, right? Nemar kan Inui, v'nemar lahalan Inui. Malahalan Inui Ravan, Nafkan Inui Ravan. So that seems to make sense, right? That seems to be a good, straightforward understanding of how I can explain the word inui to mean to restrict yourself from eating, right? To afflict yourself by not eating. So the Gemara though asks a question on this bright, and the Gemara says, "V'neilaf mi im ta'aned benotai." Let's learn it out from a different instance of the word inui, where it says im ta'aned benotai. So where does it say im ta'aned benotai? We read this not long ago in Shul, even though I wasn't in Shul, but we read this not long ago in Shul. Where does it say im ta'aned benotai?
With Lavan.
Lavan says this to Yaakov, right? After he chased him down, when Yaakov is trying to get away from Lavan, and he makes this. He ends up making a brit with Yaakov. Just a second. Okay. So here we are in Breshit Lamed Aleph. And they make this brit. Vayoma Lavan Hagal Hazaed Beini Uveincha Hayom. Right, they make a pile of stones, and Yaakov said Gal Eid, and Lavan calls it in its Aramaic name Yadar Sahaduta. B'mitzpah asher amar yitzef Hashem beini uveinecha ki nisater ish mere'eu. And mitzpah, right? It was called Galed and mitzpah, for he said, "May Hashem keep watch between me and you when we will be hidden one from another." Right? In other words, this is to bear testimony, right? That Hashem is going to be our witness, as it were. And what will he be witness to? Lavan says, "Im ta'aned benotai, v'im tikach nashim al benotai, en ishimanu rei Elokim ed beini uveinecha." So literally, what does it mean? Im ta'aned benotai, if you will afflict my daughters. That would be the simple understanding of the pasuk. But later on, the Gemara is going to say on Daf Ayin Zayin that it's talking about withholding sexual intercourse from his daughters. What am I doing here? So we'll get to this sugya more later, probably in another couple of weeks. But let's just skip down to this. Is the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph says Tashmita diikre inui minala. From where do I learn the Tashmisha Mita? Right. See, in this part of the Gemara, as I said, it's going through all of the inuyim that are listed in the Braita, in the Mishnah. And it's telling me, it's giving me sources for each of them. So what's the source to say that restriction of sexual activity on Yom Kippur is called an inui? Dichtiv, im ta'aned benotai. It quotes this pasuk. If that's what it means, im ta'aned benotai would mean if you keep, in other words, if you restrict sexual activity with my daughters, right? He's swearing that if you that this would be a violation of our agreement. Right? V'im tikach nashim. Im tanem mitashmish, v'im tikach mitzarot. So the Gemara says what it means is im ta'aneh mitashmish, if you afflict them by restraining having sexual relations, or if you take mitzarot, if you take other tzarot are other wives, right? If a person has more than one wife, then all the more than wives are called tzarot. Each one is called a tzara. Right, and Rashi says, "Im ta'aneh mitashmish, lahashbit onatan." Right, that if you stop having their onah. So what is this? So this leads from one thing to the other. What is onah? What does the word onah mean?
Pleasure.
Where do you get that from?
I believe, I mean, I
You don't know offhand. Okay. What's another meaning of onah? Gambi Ivrita Moderni. Like what is onah? What is an onah?
Period.
A period.
Mhm.
Right. A time. It could be a time period. A time. It's related to time. Right. Onata prachim. Right. Like the would be the time of when flowers blossom, or mashalo yiyeh. So this and Inui seem to be related. And this is how this becomes a little bit more complicated. So where do we see the word onah? Rashi's using it here to mean in this context of tashmish hamita, rashbit onatan, right? To keep them to keep with them. So where do we see that? So let's look at a different pasuk. So in Parshat Mishpatim, we have this. When a man sells his daughter to be a handmaiden, right? To be a slave. Lo tetzei katzei avadim. She doesn't go out the way avadim go out, the way male slaves go out, right? So the Torah has already just talked about how male slaves go out. And it's going to say that when it comes to selling a daughter into slavery, she has her own way of going out. Im ra'a be'enei adoneh asher lo ya'ada behefda la'am nachri lo yimshol l'mochra b'bigdova. In short, if her master doesn't like her, right? If she's evil in the eyes of her master, that for whom he has designated her and then hefda, redeemed her, he's not allowed to sell her to a foreign nation. If he designated her for his son, then the law that applies to other daughters is what you will do to her. If he would take another for him, that is, if the father would take another wife on top of this designated Amma that he gave to his son, and he gets another wife for him. She'era ksuta v'onata lo yigra. Then she'era ksuta v'onata, he's not allowed to do less. So each one of these psukim has, we have a lot to say about it. But let's just focus on this one here, because this is now comes to be used. So what does it mean? Sherak sutavanota lo yigra min ha'ama shiye lo kvar. He's not allowed to reduce the she'erak, the she'er ksut and ona that was already due to the amma. And what are each of those things? So Rashi explains the she'er refers to mizonot. In other words, he has to support her. Ksuta kemashma'o, he has to make sure that she's clothed. And onata is tashmish. Onata is tashmish. That's what it means. That's how, not just Rashi, this is how Chazal understood it in this context. And we learn out from this pasuk that these are three obligations that any husband has for his wife. These are obligations of the husband to the wife. He's obligated to feed her, to clothe her, and to have sexual relations with her. So how does onata come to mean sex? We'll start from this pasuk and we'll work our way back through the other psukim. Just a second. I'm going to try to remember. I thought I had all my Perushim lined up, and I might have closed this one just a second. And I'm trying to remember. Let's look at the. Yeah, I think it's this. Yeah. Let's here the Ibn Ezra. So Ibn Ezra explains that. Okay, Shira is muzona. Onata yesh. So here Ibn Ezra explains this term onata. Yesh shomrim dirata. Some people say this actually refers to housing. The kamal lefidata. All right, so and there's some proof texts that to support that idea of fidati. He says, I think that actually those psukim mean something a little bit different. And so then he says, Pirush v'anata al hamishkav. Anata really refers to sexual relations. Shehu et dodim, because it is the time of love or affection. Kimilat et b'chisaron nun kamo emet. Okay, nidgash taf. V'hine itecha. In other words, the word et, which means man, right, which means time. It's from the same. It's really the same basic root. It's just missing the nun here. It's a form that leaves out the word nun, but the word that would be ayin nun taf or ayin nun hey is the same as eight. Oh, to kamo amato. Oh, gam kenata. All right. I won't go into all of the grammar here, but so onata is mikzirat et, vatahi zot ha'et, and this now is the times. There is, so what's the relationship between time and sexual relations? So Paul, I see you nodding your head. What do you think?
Well, it's as I said, it's there's a time you should have this tashmish once a month at least.
Okay, so there's actually, there is
What I
this,
said, the period.
a period. Yeah, actually, yeah, that's a good session. So there's this idea that on that that there's the relationship is there's a notion like here when the pasuk says sherak suta v'onata lo yigra. So then you could ask yourself, well, if onata just means having sexual relations, so maybe they have sexual relations once, v'yatsa yedei chova, and then he never has to have sex with her again. But that doesn't seem to be the implication of the pasuk, because just like clothing her and feeding her is an ongoing obligation, so onata is also an ongoing obligation. So what's the relationship to time? Then it's understood. It means that you have to have sex with your wife periodically. And there's a Mishnah in Ketubot where it actually lays out the obligations depending on your profession, right? So this is where we learn that, like Talmidei Chachamim, it's once a week. But if you're let's say in modern terms, it'd be like if you're a long haul truck driver and maybe you're only home once a month, then it would be once a month, right? There's a list of I didn't actually bring this up, and I'm not going to take time to look for it now. I think it's around Perek Zayin and Ketubot in the Mishnah, but at least several different professions. But the point is that ona is the period, the time that you have sex with your wife periodically. So there is a relationship between the idea of time and sexual relations.
But that something doesn't work, because here the ona is considered as something positive. You should have this sexual, and inui is something negative.
So therein lies the rub. This is where it gets difficult. That's why I say we'll start from here. Let's work our way back. So let's go back. So we see, all right, so the Gemara here later on in Ayin Zayin, from the pasuk of Im Ta'aned Benotai, means Rashi, the Gemara, that it means that if you restrict yourself from having sex. Now, the reason it means in that context is because clearly what Lavan is saying to Yaakov is, if you do bad things to my daughters, and of course, restricting yourself from having sex, that would be a bad thing. Let's dwell on that pasuk for a moment. Where did I have that open? Just a second. I don't remember where I opened all the psukim. Just a second. All right, let's just open it up here. Oh, now I see. Okay, it doesn't matter. So here, interestingly, the Ibn Ezra talks about it as well. Im ta'aneh benotai, amar hagaon, im lo tishkav im nashecha. So the Gaon, I think is Rav Hai here, is Rav Hai Gaon, I think is who he's referring to. He explained it to mean if you do not lie with your wives. In other words, if you don't have sex with Im Taned Benotai, that's what it means. That is, that would be the explanation of Ta'anet. So Ibn Ezra actually objects to this perush. He says, "V'zod lashon nachriya." This is a strange understanding of the language. V'lo nishma kamoa b'chol mikra. We never heard of that this language meaning what he says it means anywhere else in the Torah. And if we would read the pasuk according to its plain understanding, what would it hurt? In other words, so what's the understanding of im ta'aned banotai? What would be the plain understanding?
Don't afflict them. Don't
You
do
don't
bad to
afflict
them.
them. Yeah. The hatam, and he says the hatam, the explanation is shelo lahemra, don't do bad things to them. And force them to do things that they don't want to do. That should be the simple understanding. So Ibn Ezra actually objects to this perush of the Gaon. The perush of the Gaon we see based on the Gemara that we just looked at in Yoma. So the Ibn Ezra, as a Pashtan, he doesn't like that perush, but nonetheless, that's how the Gemara understands it. The only explanation that I can give, and I didn't see anybody who said this, but on the one hand, we have this idea from Parshat Mishpatim that na refers to Tashmish Hamita. And here we have in Breshit, im ta'aner benotai, which sounds like withholding Tashmish Hamita. It sounds like it's opposite. It's the only explanation that I could give, and maybe I'm sure there's a better explanation, but there are words in Hebrew which mean something and they're opposite. Right? I don't have a list offhand, but let's say one of them is liskol. Right, from the word right, the word that we use for skila, right, to throw rocks. It's also the act of removing rocks from the ground. So, and I'm sorry I didn't prepare this, but maybe as some of you can think, but there are other words in Hebrew that have this. They have these dual meanings, where it means something and its opposite. So maybe that's the way it works here. It's a little speculative on my part, but I've been mulling this over now for a few weeks, actually longer if I go back from when I learned this sugya a long time ago. And that's what I could come up with. So in other words, if that's true, if what I'm saying is true, then that's how the Gemara understands it. Im ta'aned benotai means if you withhold tashmish from my daughters. So all of that to say, let's go back now to our Gemara. So what was the Gemara saying here? Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana. Ne'markani nui v'nemar lahalani nui malahalani nui rava nafkani nui rava. So Tana Rabbi Yishmael wants to say that inui refers to not eating, and then the Gemara says v'neilafim im ta'aned banotai. Why does Tana Rabbi Yishmael immediately say inui refers not eating? Maybe it means not having sex, which I see from pasuk in Breshit. So now so what's the problem? It's not saying that that's more likely, but it's not less likely. In other words, I have two competing psukim to explain Inui Nefesh in the context of Yom Kippur. I could look at the pasuk of Vayancha ve'arivecha. I could also look at the pasuk of Imtanet benotai. How does the Beis Rabbi Shmuel know that it must be referring to Vayancha ve'arivecha? On the face of it, there's nothing to push one pasuk more than the other. So the Gemara says, "Danin inui derabim me inui derabim, vein danin inui derabim me inui diachid." So we learn out affliction of the masses, right, of the general public, from an affliction of the general public, and we don't learn out an affliction of the general public from a private affliction. So what is the oh, I see we have an extra Talmud at the shiur tonight. It's very cute. So what's the Inui Durabim? That we learn out Inui Durabim me Inui Durabim. What's the affliction of the masses? And what are the two afflictions of the masses? What does it mean, affliction of the masses?
Well, one is Yom Kippur, and then one is Ravon.
Right. In other words, in the pasuk of Ayancha ve'arivecha, that was also an affliction that was given to Klal Yisrael. And Tanu Nafshotechem is an affliction that's given to Klal Yisrael. So I'm going to learn, so it makes sense for me if I have to choose now between learning about Inui Nefesh from Vayancha ve'arivecha or from Imtanet benotai, makes sense that I'm going to learn it out from Vayancha ve'arivecha because the context is essentially the same. It's an affliction that applied to Klal Yisrael, and Inui Nefesh on Yom Kippur applies to Klal Yisrael, whereas Imtanet benotai was an affliction that would apply only to the wives of Yaakov. So what you see from this is that as the Gemara is trying to figure out which pasuk I'm going to learn out Inui from, because as I say, on the face of it, they have equal weights. Vayancha ve'arivecha, Imtanet benotai have equal weight because they're both talking about some kind of Inui. So then I have to go further and say, I need to see in greater depth what their respective contexts are. So in this one, the context is Rabim, and in this one, the context is Yachid. So our context of Yom Kippur is Rabim, so it makes sense I'm going to learn out Inui of Rabim and not Inui of Yachid. So then we say, wait a second, but I have another instance of Inui. V'neilaf me'inui d'Mitzrayim. So, okay. So, Vayana v'yarivecha, that was an affliction of Klal Yisrael. But I also have Vayar et Anyenu, right? Everybody knows this pasuk of Vayar et Anyenu, right? When do we read this pasuk of Vayar et Anyenu?
In the Haggadah.
The Haggadah. So what is it saying there? What is that? What's the context there?
This is this is when God becomes, as it were, becomes aware of the afflictions of Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim.
In Mitzrayim. And what's the drasha? Mi'amrinan zu prishut derech eretz. Right, because what's the pasuk? Right, so the pasuk is from Parshat Kitavo. It's Parshat Bikurim. It's the Vidui Bikurim, that when you brought the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, V'anita v'amarta, first you present the bikurim to the Kohen, and then you set a formula that's stated in the Torah. Arami ovei Ravi, vayered Mitzrayim, vayaga sham b'tei ma'at, vayihi sham l'goy gadol. And then it says, "Vanitzak." I'm skipping a couple of psukim. Vanitzak el Hashem Elokei Avotenu, vayishma Hashem et kolenu, vayar et anyenu, ve'et amalenu, ve'et lachatzeinu. So, of course, Chazal understood that each one of those things is a different thing. It's not just a general cry. So Hashem heard our voice, in which he heard us crying out, and then he saw our affliction and our toil and our lachatz, right, and our pressure. So what is the anyenu? What was the affliction? Prishut derech eretz. And what does that mean? What's prishut derech eretz?
Refraining from relations.
Refraining from relations, right? In other words, again, I see here, I have another pasuk of inui that refers to sex. And our anyenu, our inui, was that we had to refrain from our wives, right? Or from our spouses, I should say. Which is, and derech eretz, right, the way of the land, is a euphemism for tashmish hamita, which is another euphemism for having sex. Okay, so the Gemara says, okay, but I could learn inui from Mitzrayim, from inui Mitzrayim. So what's the kasha that the Gemara is asking from this pasuk?
The kasha would be, I mean, it just said that we would not learn the meaning of anui. We learn the meaning of anui from something that applies to rabim, to the klal as a whole. And this would seem, and this other instance of where it refers to derech eretz would seem to apply to the klal.
Excellent, right. So in other words, why did I say that I'm going to learn inui from Vayancha ve'arivecha, not from Imtanet benotai? Because Tanet benotai is inui de yachid, and Vayancha ve'arivecha is inui de rabim. So that's fine, except what? Now I'll show you. I have another inui, which was inui de rabim, and it refers to sex again. So then hadrakush in laduchta, then our kasha goes back in its place. So then why should I choose the pasuk about avon over the pasuk about tashmish hamita? Ela danin inui bidei shamayim inui bidei shamayim, ve'en danin inui bidei shamayim inui bidei adam. Right. So rather, I'll make a different kind of limud, and I'll say I'm going to learn an affliction which is in the hands of heaven. In other words, it's something that was directed by God in the hands of God. I'll learn out something, an inui that's bidei shamayim from another inui bidei shamayim, and I won't learn out the inui bidei shamayim that's inui bidei adam. That's something in the hands of man. So what's the inui? What is the inui bidei shamayim and the inui bidei shamayim?
The inui of Yom Kippur and the inui of the Ravon in the Midbar.
Right. Exactly. So both of those are things that were in the hands of God, as opposed to what? Inui bidei shamayim of Yom Kippur. What was the inui bidei adam?
Mitzrayim.
Mitzrayim. There was the prishut derech eretz in Mitzrayim was not ordained by God. That was something that came about because of Gzerot of Paro. So in other words, I have to make some differentiation. I have to make a chiluk between Inui when it's talking about Tashmish as opposed to when it's talking about Ra'avon. And so ultimately, this is the chiluk I have to make. Let's look at Rashi. Let's learn out from the pasuk of Imtanet Benotai. Demokile lekamana tashmish, because later on in the Gemara, that's the Gemara looked at, that Gemara says that pasuk is talking about tashmish. So I say Inui Derabim from Inui Derabim. So Inui Derabim of Yoma Kippur l'chol Yisrael, Taman l'chol Yisrael, right? Eating the man and then being restricted before eating and then eating the man, that is something that applies to Klal Yisrael. And Inui B'dei Shemaim Yoma Kippurim is B'dei Shemaim Mitzvat Achi V'chein Inui Haman. Similarly, the Inui of not having man was also b'mitzvat hamel. It was ordained by God. So at this point, I understand now this bright of Debei Rabbi Ishmael, that he learns the inui of not, that inui on Yom Kippur means the inui of not eating, b'gzeira shava from the pasuk of Ayancha v'yarivecha. Let's just finish off today by reading the next brayta. Debei Rabbi Ishmael Tana. Nemar kan inui v'nemar lahalan inui ma lahalan inui ra'avon avkan inui ra'avon. Right. So this brayta, it's the same brayta. Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. We already did this. I just repeated it by accident. Hold on. I think actually we're going to stop here. The next part of the Gemara, the next roughly 3 daf in the Gemara talks about man. In other words, now it's going to digress on man, and it's quite a fascinating topic. And as I told you, I don't think we're going to go through this whole thing. I'm going to basically skip ahead to where the Gemara gets back on track to talking about Inuyim. I do think that it's quite fitting that we talk about the man in this context. But maybe just to finish off for tonight, I'm just going to show you the beginning of this sugya. Of course, you're all welcome to go through it yourselves, but this is how it starts off. Right? That Hashem fed you man in the midbar in order to afflict you. That's the passage that's being quoted. Rav Ami v'Rav Asi Chadamar Eino Damesh Mi sheyesh lo pat b'salo u'mi she'ein lo pat b'salo. A person who has bread in his basket is not like the person who does not have bread in his basket. V'chadamar Eino Dameh Mi shero'eh v'ochel l'mi she'eino ro'eh v'ochel. The one who sees and eats is not like the one who does not see and eat. So each of them learns out something a little different, right? One of them says the person, so there's a difference between somebody who has food in their basket. So what it right, it means like if you have a supply of food, it's not like someone who doesn't have a supply of food, even if you both just ate a meal. Maybe you both ate the same meal. One of them knows that he has more food to eat, and the other one does not know that he has more food to eat. Because it's related to this question of the man, right? So what's the thing? The man falls every day, right? And then a double portion on Erev Shabbat. So you could ask, why didn't Hashem just, and the Gemara talks about this, why doesn't Hashem just give them a year's supply at a time? So the answer to that is, so God wants people to understand that their sustenance is based on his generosity. And they have to look, they have to look for the man they have to go and gather the man every day. But if they knew that it was there all the time, they could easily forget about God. Okay. So Mishi Yesho Pat B'Salo, Rashi says, Ein Lo Pat B'Salo, the person who doesn't have food in his basket, Ochel Hayam V'Doeg Al Lamachar. He eats today, but he's worried about tomorrow. What about the person who doesn't see what he eats? Let's say like a blind person. Achlat man to'em tam kol aminim ve'eno roa ela man. Eating the man, you taste all kinds of tastes, right? It had all kinds of tastes, but you only see man. In each case, they're playing up different aspects of what the man meant, because it says God gave them man in the midbar, the man, right? The man anotcha, to afflict you. So what's the affliction of the man? So the affliction of the man could be understood that you don't have pat besal, because you have to wait for it every day. So it's also a kind of an affliction. Or you could say it's because of the nature of the man itself, because you did see man, but you didn't really see what you were eating, because the man had many different tastes. Anyway, this I think I'll leave it at this. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about more this next time, but this is like an introduction to this subject. Yes, Paul, go ahead.
The man did have any taste you just wanted. That's what the Midrashim say.
So that's what, right. So that's one of the things that Chazal say. So what's the inui? The inui is it tastes like something that you don't see. And the idea, so it's a gustatory thing, right? That part of the enjoyment that we get out of food is the presentation. It's seeing what we're eating. And so God, on the one hand, he gives you man, which can taste like whatever you want, but you don't get to see whatever you want. So it's a limited experience, and that's the inui. Or the inui is that you get the man, it's enough for you, it's enough to sustain you and, to even make you full, but you only get enough for one day at a time. So you're constantly worried about the next day, right? What do they say with investment companies? Past history is no indication of future profits or
future returns.
Future returns, right? So the fact that God gave man every day is not a guarantee that he's going to give it the next day. And that's why I said, because he could have given it he could have given it way in advance. By the same token, he could also have given people, instead of man, like lahamon am, he could give everybody whatever they wanted off the menu. If you wanted pizza, he'd give you pizza. If you wanted chicken cacciatore, he'd give you chicken cacciatore.
If you wanted quail, you're in trouble.
As we see. So there's this double, so the man has this this edge to it, that on the one hand, it's this phenomenal miracle that sustains Bnei Israel in the Midbar for most of their many years in the Midbar, but it comes with an inui, it comes with an affliction. And it could be both, right? But either the affliction is that you don't have food security, because you could never know for sure that God's going to bring it tomorrow. Now, I'll even add in, not because we don't trust in God, but what if Bnei Israel does something to make them not merit getting the next day's man? Or the affliction is, you get food that tastes like whatever you want, but you never get the full enjoyment of the food because you don't get to see what you're eating. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Any last comments?
It's like the food of the astronauts.
Right, which they have like in tubes, right? And they just, I think I read.
But
that-
actually, I think that analogy can be pushed, because the astronauts are literally on life support. Like, they are totally dependent on, their craft. Whereas Bnei Yisrael is sort of the Ananei HaKavod, like they are totally, their shoes don't wear out, their clothes don't wear out. There's no snakes and scorpions. Like they are, as it were, sort of in a kind of, they're in a kind of life support in much the same way.
They're lost in space.
Yes, yes.
No, but you're right. It is a good, the space station is a good analogy. I was just going to say, I read somewhere that I think that in the space station, I think everybody was, they did grant like special wishes, like you could bring like one particular food or something that, like, just to have. But in general, yes, the food supply, it's like I say, like you can get all kinds of things, but you know, it's served like nicely in a restaurant. It might be like in a paste, or it might be in some other kind of form. So you get sustained, but you don't get the full enjoyment of the food. And yeah, Michael Werner, I think you're right. It is a good analogy. So, okay. So if all goes well, I actually will be in the States next week, but we should be able to meet. It looks like I'm leaving on Motzei Shabbat. And all should be well. So until next time, I'll see you next year.
The tornado is over?
What, in the States?
Mhm.
You mean right, they had a huge blizzard, like thank you. Yeah, so it could be that it was just Bashert that I didn't go this week, because actually Washington was not hit as hard, but I know that thousands of flights got canceled, at least domestically. So
Yeah.
you see, Gamzula Tova. Okay, so I'll see you next year.
Nasiya Tova.
All right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Good night, Nasiya Tova.
Nasiya Tova.
Toda.